Okay, so have you ever you know, messed up a pronoun?
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been there.
It can be so awkward. Like once I accidentally referred to my neighbor's cat as he when it was actually a she.
Oh, I bet that was a little embarrassing.
It made me realize just how tricky these little words can be. So today we're going on a deep dive into the world of pronouns.
Sounds fun.
We're going to, unpack all the rules and curiosities about pronouns based on this document called Rules and Curiosities About Pronouns in English.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Okay, so before we, get into the details, maybe we should start with the basics. What are pronouns really? I mean, what's the point of even having them?
Well, I think the main point of pronouns is to avoid repetition. Like imagine having to say your name every time you talked about yourself.
Oh my gosh, that would be so weird.
Right. It'd be like John went to the store and John bought some milk and then John came home.
Yeah, it sounds super robotic.
Exactly. So pronouns make our language flow more smoothly and sound less repetitive.
Okay, so pronouns help us avoid sounding like robots.
Yeah, pretty much.
But pronouns aren't, just one thing, right? There are different kinds.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole family of pronouns, each with its own special job.
Like what?
Well, you've got your personal pronouns like I, you, he, she, it, we, and they.
Oh, yeah, those are the most basic ones.
Exactly. They're the ones we use all the time to refer to people.
And then there are what are they called? Possessive pronouns?
Yes, those are the ones that show ownership, like mine, yours, his, hers, its, ours, and theirs.
Okay, so personal pronouns are for pointing to people, and possessive pronouns are for showing what belongs to them.
Exactly. And then, they're the ones that emphasize the subject.
Oh, you mean reflexive pronouns, like myself, yourself, and all those?
Yeah, those are the ones, they often add a bit of emphasis to the sentence.
Okay, so we've got personal pronouns, possessive pronouns, and reflexive
We
pronouns.
do. And don't forget the demonstrative pronouns.
Oh, what were those?
Like this, that, these, and those.
Oh, right. Those are the ones we use to point to specific things.
Exactly.
And there are the question-asking pronouns, right?
Yes, the interrogative pronouns who, whom, whose, which, and what.
Oh, I can just picture them with little question marks above their heads.
Uh-huh. I love that image.
Okay, so we've got the pointers, the possessive ones, the emphatic ones, the pointing to specific things ones, and the question-asking ones.
And last but not least, the relative pronouns. These are the connectors, like who, whom, who's which, and that.
Connectors, what do you mean?
Well, they connect different parts of a sentence, like the book that I borrowed from you was fascinating.
Okay, so they're kind of like bridges between ideas.
Precisely. They help us build more complex sentences and provide additional information.
Wow, so there are a lot of different types of pronouns. It's amazing how they all work together to make our language so expressive.
It really is. And, it's important to use the right pronoun in the right situation.
That's true. But how do we know which one is right? I mean, are there rules we need to follow?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely rules.
Uh,
And one of the most important is agreement.
Agreement.
Yeah, like pronouns need to agree with the nouns they replace.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, like if you say, the cat chased its tail.
Okay, it refers to cat, right?
Exactly. You wouldn't say the cat chased their tail because cat is singular and there is plural.
Ah, that makes sense. So pronouns need to match in number, singular or plural.
Yep. And sometimes they also need to agree in gender.
Like using he for a male and she for a female.
Exactly. But, language is always evolving.
What do you mean?
Well, these days we are more aware of gender diversity, right?
Right.
So using they, them as a singular pronoun has become more common and accepted.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely noticed that.
It's a way to be more inclusive of people who don't identify as strictly male or female.
It's interesting how language changes to reflect our, evolving understanding of the world.
Absolutely. Language is a living thing. It's constantly adapting and growing.
So we've talked about agreement, which is about matching pronouns to nouns. What other pronoun rules are there?
Well, another important one is understanding the difference between subject and object pronouns.
Oh, right. Subject and object. Those always trip me up.
Well, it's actually pretty simple. Subject pronouns are the ones doing the action,
Okay.
and object pronouns are the ones receiving the action.
So in the sentence, she threw the ball.
She is the subject because she's doing the throwing.
And ball is the object because it's being thrown.
Exactly. But if you flip it around and say the ball hit her, then her becomes the object pronoun because she's the one being hit.
Okay, that actually makes sense. Subject is the doer and object is the done to.
You got it.
Are there any like tricks for remembering which is which?
Well, one helpful tip is that subject pronouns usually come before the verb in a sentence,
Okay.
and object pronouns usually come after.
So she threw the ball versus the ball hit her.
Exactly.
I'll try to remember that. Now, what about those reflexive pronouns? We talked about those earlier, like myself and yourself.
Right. Remember how they can kind of emphasize the subject?
Yeah.
Well, they can also add nuance beyond just avoiding repetition. Like, she baked the cake herself, emphasizes that she did it alone.
Oh, that's a good point. It's not just that she baked the cake, but that she did it without any help.
Exactly. Reflexive pronouns can add those little shades of meaning.
This is fascinating. It's amazing how much depth there is to these seemingly simple words.
It really is. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, I know. But before we go any further, I think we need to take a break.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll be right back after the short break to delve even deeper into the world of pronouns.
I can't wait. So, pronouns can be pretty controversial sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, I remember all the debate about using they as a singular pronoun.
Yeah, that was a big one. It really challenged how people think about gender and language.
It's wild how these tiny words can cause such strong reactions.
It shows you how much power language has. For centuries, English didn't really have a good way to talk about someone without, like, specifying their gender.
So they, as a singular pronoun, kind of filled that gap.
Exactly.
Well,
And it's not like it's a totally new thing. People have been using they that way for ages, but it's become much more common and accepted recently.
it's like language is catching up to how we understand the world.
Right. And it makes you wonder about, like, the history of pronouns in general.
Yeah, have they always been around? Or did they, like, evolve over time?
Oh, they've definitely evolved. I mean, pronouns have been a part of language for as long as there's been language. They're pretty essential. But the way we use them has changed a lot.
So, like, how we use pronouns today is different from how people used them, say, 100 years ago.
Absolutely. For example, the pronoun thou.
Yeah, I think I've seen that in, like, old books and stuff.
Right. It used to be the informal way to address someone, but we don't use it at all anymore.
It's like language is shedding its old skin and growing new forms.
That's a great way to put it. And those changes often reflect shifts in, social norms and values. Like the singular they is a good example of that. It shows a move towards greater inclusivity.
Okay, that makes sense. But the document we're looking at, it mentions that singular they can sometimes be confusing, especially in writing.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Especially
Okay.
if you're not careful. Remember how we talked about ambiguous pronoun reference?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, if you use they without making it crystal clear who it refers to, you can end up with a really confusing sentence.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you write something like, the teacher spoke to the student and they were upset. Who is they in that sentence?
It could be either one.
Exactly. So you need to be really careful about making sure the pronoun has a clear antecedent, a noun it refers back to.
So even though singular they is becoming more common, we still need to use it thoughtfully.
Absolutely. Clarity is key, no matter what pronoun you're using.
Right. So it's not just about following the grammar rules. It's also about being aware of how other people will interpret what you're saying.
Exactly. It's all about communication.
Okay, so we've talked about the evolution of pronouns, the importance of agreement and clarity, and all the different types of pronouns. Is there anything else we should consider when it comes to this topic?
Well, pronouns can tell you a lot about, like, power dynamics and social relationships.
Well, that's interesting. How so?
Well, think about the pronouns we use to address people directly, like you versus thou in older English.
Oh, yeah, thou.
The choice of pronoun often depended on, like, your social status and your relationship with the other person.
So it's a way of showing respect or maybe even a disrespect.
Exactly. And we still do that today, even if we don't realize it.
Like how?
Well, think about titles like Mr. and S before surnames.
Okay.
We use those titles in formal situations to show respect, right?
Huh.
Or, like, in an academic setting, you might address someone as professor or doctor.
Right. It's a way of acknowledging their expertise or authority.
Exactly. And those little pronoun choices, they might seem small, but they can actually have a big impact on how people perceive each other and, how they interact.
So it's not just about grammar, it's about the social context too.
Absolutely. And understanding those nuances can make you a much more effective communicator.
I'm really glad we did this deep dive. I'm learning so much about pronouns.
Me too. It's amazing how much there is to learn about these little words.
I know. And before we wrap things up, what are like the most important things you think our listeners should remember about pronouns?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that pronouns are way more complex than they might seem at first,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, they're not just like filling in for a noun. There's more to it.
Exactly. They can, carry meaning about like social relationships and stuff, and they can even play a role in how we think about gender.
That's true. We've talked about all that, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah, it has. And on a more practical level, understanding how pronouns work can make a big difference in how you communicate.
Right, like you can avoid those awkward mistakes, and you can express yourself more clearly too.
Exactly. And you can, be more inclusive with your language, which
Mhm.
is really important these days.
It is. So it's not just about, getting the grammar right. It's about connecting with people and being respectful.
Absolutely. And I think another thing to remember is that language is always like changing and evolving.
Yeah, we talked about that too. Like how we use pronouns today is different from how people used them in the past.
Right. And it's going to keep changing in the future too.
That's kind of exciting, but also a little intimidating.
I know what you mean. But it just means we need to be like open to new ways of using language and not be afraid to ask questions.
That's good advice. So, to our listener, I would say, like, pay attention to how pronouns are being used, in the books you read and the conversations you have.
Yeah, and think about like what those pronouns are conveying and how they shape the meaning of what you're uh, reading or hearing.
And don't forget about those questions that the document raised.
Right, those are really good starting points for like exploring the deeper levels of language. Think about the difference between possessive pronouns and adjectives, and challenge yourself to identify relative and demonstrative pronouns.
It's like we're giving our listener a toolkit for understanding pronouns.
And who knows, maybe someday you'll be the one, discovering new ways to use pronouns.
Wow, that would be amazing. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this deep dive.
It's been fun talking about pronouns with you.
Yeah, me too. And to our listener, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.